Title Section 504.
Right.
It outlines what a disability is.
Right.
Could a concussion fit into a disability, or would that have to be a lingering issue?
All right. So if it were just a transient concussion for a week, it would probably not count as a disability. But it doesn't have to be. But you could, from a concussion, have something that qualified as a disability. And certainly when I read your email, head injury could be, repeated concussions have long-term impacts. Head injury have some longer-term impacts. So the way definition of disability works at this point is I'm going to kind of divide it in two. So if you have a permanent condition that substantially limits a major life activity. So thinking counts as a major life activity. So a head injury that impacts memory, that impacts processing speed, that impacts attention, all those things could conceivably be a disability. It would need to impact it, more than just a passing little bit, a substantial amount. So that's kind of in comparison to the typical person. So you could have those long-term impacts that might happen from repeated concussions, might happen from a severe head trauma. The law recognizes not everything is permanent and that it can still be a disability if it has a substantial impact. So, again, it's going to be a kind of determination, almost more a state of art than a simple diagnostic determination that says this is severe enough that it is impacting you, and that's in a significant way, and that's a contextual statement. So for a student whose life is organized 3 months at a time, right? Something might reach a substantial impact that for me, whose life is organized on a longer time frame, right, and might not have more flexibility in due dates because I'm not in classes.
Good point.
That context weighs into that decision to some degree. So
now, who makes these decisions? I was talking to David Isaacs, and he's the one who referred me to you, and he said that it was usually the professors. There's no he said there was no you could go to student advocacy, obviously, or disability services, but he says usually it's up to the professors if they wanted to accommodate you.
So there's a piece of it that's up to the professors. So it's an interactive process. So disability services would work with you to say, based on your condition, based on the information you provide, based on the information your doctor provides, there's a substantial impact. And I'm going to go to your question about attendance as a really good model. So you have some attendance issues related to the head injury. They would document that and say that's a real need for you. And then you would go to your professors with their assistance, if you needed it, to talk about how does that interact with the requirements of the class, right? So if you were I occasionally teach statistics.
Okay.
So if you were in my statistics class, while I might have an attendance policy, an exception to that attendance policy, as long as at the end of the day you were calculating standard deviations, probably not a huge issue to give you some additional absences. You can read that material in a book. You could rent some videos. You could go to some websites. There are other places for you to get that information outside of class, and that responsibility might be more on you than on me if you came to my class, but it's probably pretty flexible there, right? If you were in a class on a residency on neurosurgery, we'll go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, right? If you're not there, you're not getting the skills, right? And so while very few classes are a residency in neurosurgery, and probably most classes aren't as content driven as statistics, right? Most of them are somewhere in between. So it's a negotiation, and disability services or student advocacy might help you with that negotiation. They would help facilitate the process. So the professor has a role, but if you were working through disability services, their role isn't absolute. It has to have a rational basis in the nature of their class.
The professor can't just be like, "Oh, I don't like you.
Too much work. I don't like you." Yeah, no, it has to be a rational based decision.
Okay.
So if I take kind of the straight, simplest disability process on campus, you go to disability services. They evaluate, talk to you, figure out here's what your needs are that are legitimately based on your condition. Help you present those to instructors. If the instructor says yes, they help you work out the details. If the instructor says no, they ask some questions about why not, what's the problem, what isn't happening if he misses these extra classes, or what's different if he has some extra time on an exam. How does that work? It's a problem. And they might try to suggest or facilitate some other solution that they hadn't anticipated. If you and the professor and they couldn't come to agreement, my office would do the appeal to that. So you could petition my office and say, here's my needs. They said no. I don't think the no is reasonable. That Professor Lissner guy is awful. And I would interview you. I would get information on the class and the requirements of the class, and make a determination of, was that really essential to the class, or was that something we could modify?
Now, getting back to, you were talking about like the spectrum, like, a couple classes opposed to a residency. What if a student, suffers a head injury, he's playing flag football or basketball the night before an exam, and he has an exam the next day? How should a student go about that?
So that's being sick.
That's okay.
All right. So I'm going to make a distinction between I'm sick and I have a disability. So if I had a car accident and broke my leg and was in traction, I wouldn't show up for my class. So, but if I twisted my ankle and it just hurt a little bit, I probably could make it to class. So I don't want to overdo the analogy piece, but if you banged your head and had a concussion, and your doctor said, I don't think you should take a test, I don't think you should drive, I don't think, you would document that like you would the flu, twisting your ankle, or anything else. And that probably, at least for that class tomorrow, is going to be medical documentation for an illness. Now, if there were lingering impacts and you needed longer to reschedule the test and other things, then it would kind of go over to disability services.
Okay.
So disability services wouldn't handle, food poisoning or the flu, and they wouldn't handle, I had an accident last night and can't make my test tomorrow. That makes sense?
Yeah. So it's more long-term issues.
Yeah.
Got it. And have concussions, have they been an issue you've dealt with before at disability services?
So, the simple answer is going to be yes. The slightly less simple answer is a concussion the way you described your last example. I got a concussion playing last night, and I'm going to miss tomorrow's class. Like I said, is not something they would typically do, but concussions can have fairly long-term effects, particularly if you've had a series of concussions. So we've certainly disability services has dealt with students that have head trauma, whether it's from a series of concussions or one traumatic event, in a number of ways. So it can be.
Are there any cases, not even at this university, but nationwide, that have set a precedent at all, or any of them at the top of your head? Or
so the court cases, which is what I hear you asking for, that I'm aware of have not really focused on head trauma and concussion. I mean, there are lots of court cases out there about how the process should work. Because the law doesn't do a laundry list of disabilities. It doesn't say concussion is or isn't a disability, dyslexia is or isn't a disability, right? It says a disability is something that substantially impacts a major life activity that's based on a physical or mental, a physical or mental illness of some sort, right? So there's lots of case law that guides us, but not a lot that I can't think of any that the example is particularly based in head trauma.
Perfect. That's honestly all I have for you today.
Okay.
Thank you so